We will call to order the regular board meeting of the Chicago Board of Election Commissioners. Good morning. My name is Maricel Hernandez. I'm the chairwoman. Seated to my right is Commissioner William Cressy, and to my left is Commissioner Jonathan Swain. Next on the agenda is the consideration. Are there any changes? If not, then we will proceed with the approval of the minutes. We have 3 sets of minutes. First one is the regular board meeting of October 10, 2017. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Next is the meeting of October 19, 2017. Motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And the last one is the regular board meeting of October 24th, 2017. Motion to approve.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All the meetings are approved. Next is the Executive Director's Report, but before we get to the Executive Director's Report, I want to report, and it's really my pleasure to report that we have a new Assistant Executive Director, and it is Mr. Charles Holliday. And Charles has been here for many, many, many years in various capacities, has done an excellent job, and we are very, very pleased and honored to have him. And Charles, why don't you take your seat next to Mr. Gough? We couldn't have asked for a better person to fill this position. Thank you, Charles, for accepting.
Thank you, and Madam Chairman, fellow commissioners, and Mr. Gough. I look forward to furthering our relationship here with the board and Chicago Board of Elections.
Thank you so much. So now, Mr. Gough, do you have a report?
Yes, Madam Chairwoman. Just to give some heads up of what's going on in the future. Well, just to let the board members know, we had Jim Allen and I had a conference call with Cook County's Correction Department about pretrial detainees, and they want to make some changes, and not really sure how we're going to do this, but we're going to meet with the Cook County Departments of Corrections, the Sheriff's Office, and with other agencies. We have a meeting with them on the 6th, December 6th at 3 o'clock here in the office. So I wanted the board members to be aware of that. Second item is that we are having a meeting with Equip for Equality in the Justice Department on Wednesday the 15th, and I have a representative. Where is? Oh, here we go. Would you please come up?
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Olga Prybl from Equip for Equality. So we just have a couple updates. We've been working fast and furiously and completed the development and proposal for all temporary and permanent fixes to address the polling place surveys that we conducted last November on Election Day and also during the summer. Everything has been put and recorded in an Excel workbook that we submitted to DOJ and to CBOE, and we're looking forward to our meeting tomorrow. So, any questions?
Well, no, just so after the meeting, you'll establish your next step. Okay.
Yes.
After we meet with Justice, but we're very pleased the way things are going right now.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Is there anything more, Mr. Gough?
Just to let you know, there is a meeting on the 20th of November with the State Board of Election to talk about Crosscheck. Mr. Lasker and myself will be at that meeting, State Board.
And I know, Mr. Gough, that we did make our recommendation to the Board of Election that we withdraw from, that the
Correct.
state does not use Crosscheck at all.
Right.
And instead try to broaden the use of ERIC in conjunction with other states.
Correct, and that's what we're meeting with the State Board to. They just want to tell us their plans, and I think they're going to do the same thing. So.
Oh, Thank you.
they're taking our recommendations, I'm happy to say. And basically, that's all I have for my board members right now.
Okay.
Can I go back to a previous
Yep.
point? You said that the county officials are looking to change how they handle pretrial detainees. What's the sense of what they're looking at versus what's been done in the past?
They had an experiment at the April election with Cook County, and they did they did prisoners similar to early vote. The problem is the number of prisoners that were under the county's jurisdiction was about 300. The number of pretrial detainees that are in the Chicagoland area that we would handle is about 6,000. So there's a difference between voting 300 and voting 6,000. And the logistics are how many days will we be out there? You know, right now we use it as an absentee program similar to all the other big cities around the United States. I just got an email from Houston. They use our procedures. They took our procedures in Houston. So it's something that we're going to discuss.
And when you define the difference in numbers, you're saying those that are in actually in custody versus those who are
these are pretrial detainees. They haven't been sentenced yet.
But he's,
Haven't been convicted.
I haven't been convicted. I'm sorry.
Okay,
Haven't been
okay.
convicted. They've been sentenced, but they haven't been convicted yet.
okay, but these are folks that may be on home confinement or maybe
No,
they're
they're
in the jail.
they're at
those in the jail. Okay,
They're in the jail.
okay, got it.
So that's what we're working with.
and the first group, the smaller group, are ones that have been convicted but not sentenced yet?
They are, the smaller group is the people who live in suburban
In
Cook.
suburban Cook.
Ah,
Oh,
So we're
okay.
about 300, and there are about 6,000 in the city of Chicago.
gotcha. Okay.
And that's what we're reviewing.
Okay, okay, I didn't understand that distinction.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Secondly, has there been any conversation? I know there was some circling conversation around the same conversation about doing some groups wanting to work with us to do, letting folks know about the laws around felonies and voting and things of that nature.
And that's part of the meeting also that we're having. There are several groups, sergeant survivors, and one of the groups that go out to Cook County and register people. Now they want to go out and actually conduct the election.
Mhm.
So something that we need to sit down and work and get procedures for.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Anything else, Mr. Brown?
Nope, that's about it right now.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Holliday, I don't know if you have any.
Nothing at the time, just again, thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you.
We look forward to a full report next time.
Yes, sir.
And next, we have our Communications Director, Mr. Allen.
Good morning, Commissioners. So Mr. Holliday's too modest, congratulations. But this past weekend, they were in the office, again, the voter registration department, that now we have some other big shoes to fill. But they were in the office over the weekend handling the variety of campaigns who are coming in to check their petitions before the filing begins on November 27th. And so we've been very active down on the 6th floor with a variety of candidates for different offices coming in to check their petitions to see if these are registered voters at the addresses indicated or in the district indicated. Secondly, since we last met, I had the opportunity to join a panel discussion sponsored by the Illinois Campaign for Political Reform and the League of Women Voters. It was specifically about election security questions and, more importantly, threats to election security. It was a very pleasant discussion. We got to tackle a number of issues. Mr. Gough, in his modesty, he didn't mention that this week he is going to be participating in an event sponsored by UIC and the League of Women Voters on voter turnout and what are the keys to participation, what affects it either downward or upward, because a lot of it doesn't have to do with what we do. We throw the same party every time. It's just a matter of how many people decide to show up. Next,
When
recently
and where is that one?
That's at University of Illinois at Chicago.
Okay, when is it?
That is
Friday at
Friday?
10. Right at 10 o'clock.
This Friday, 10 a.m. Thank you, Helene. We had pleasure of joining the Joyce Foundation, sponsored an event recently to celebrate the passage of the automatic voter registration. A number of voter engagement groups were participating that day. A number of lawmakers were there. So that was a good event over at Pederinos, basically saying we got the law passed, but we still have a lot of work to do before its implementation occurs in 2019. We're moving ahead, like the petition checking going on downstairs on forms and signage. There's an IFB out on the street, so we're going to be taking bids on that in the early part of December. So we're moving ahead with designs on signs and redesigns of signs and forms and everything like that. So we're settled in for the March primary. And we're also moving ahead with the military overseas system for voters to be able to access their ballots online and then mail them in. That's all.
Any questions?
Yeah, any feeling from the crowds that we're getting downstairs? Is this going to be, we're going to have a very busy electoral board season? Or?
Well, I mean, it depends on the office, because a lot of the offices in question, we won't have jurisdiction over. So if it's a county-wide office or county board member, we're never going to see any kind of objection case. Same with judicial or statewide office. Now, if it's a state rep or state senate office that's within Cook County and touches Chicago, then it could be ours. So they're checking everything from sub-circuit judges to statewide offices. There are people down there who have clients up and down the ballot who are checking petitions for them. So
It's a full house.
Okay.
In fact, we're looking that we may have to expand, and the closer it gets, the more computers we're going to need. So.
Thank you. Next, we'll proceed with old business, and we have infrastructure projects and changes in election administration. And I'll combine that with voting equipment. Mr. Gough, I know that we're still in our evaluation
Yes, we are.
process internally, and we'll be continuing with that.
Yes, we will.
And then anything new on electronic poll books?
there's a test of the system that's going to happen at the warehouse, similar to the test that we had ahead of the 2016 election.
Yeah.
That test was very vital to our success. So since they've made several little programming changes, they want to go through the same battery of tests to make sure everything's set for March.
Okay, Judge. Okay, thank you. And next is legislation. Anything there, Mr. Lasker?
There's not much to report on the state level. I'd like to talk about a few little things that have come through the city council. They've been referred, but those are matters that we've come across our agency's desk this week. There's a possible ordinance in the works that would strengthen local rules on data breaches. So it sort of takes a look at the Illinois Personal Information Protection Act and makes it a little stronger for anything that involves Chicago residents. If there's a data breach, they would want the disclosure made within 15 days, whereas under the state law, it's just under sort of a reasonable time standard. It does carve out an exception. I'm glad to see that that 15-day deadline could be delayed if, for purposes related to investigating the extent of the breach. The ordinance would expressly not apply to governmental agencies, so it wouldn't directly affect us. But if we had a vendor that did something along those lines, we would be ancillarily involved. This is just a proposed and referred ordinance. Another proposed and referred ordinance involves campaign finance matters. The city would be attempting to create a rule that social media organizations, social media companies, and internet search engine companies would have to start filing some disclosures, presumably with the State Board of Elections. I don't know for sure. The ordinance didn't quite mention that. But the disclosures would be for any time a political campaign spends money to boost posts or to do advertising on social media and boost search results on search engines. So that would be an interesting new rule. Also, there are 3 advisory referenda the City Council is currently mulling. So we have the possibility that we'll be having 3 referenda on the ballot. But for legislation, that's the local stuff that
Okay,
I'll talk about.
thank you. We'll proceed now to new business. And the first item under new business is a lease agreement between 108 North State Street, that's the Walgreens,
No,
No.
that's block 37.
Block 37, and, I'm sorry, and the Chicago Board of Elections. And this is for training purposes that we have
Judges training.
entered into a similar lease agreement in the past. And it would be for office space in suites 260 and 350 of Block 37 to be used as poll worker training, as a poll worker training center. And the contract term is January 2nd, 2018 through March 23rd, 2018 in the amount of $40,000. Is there anything additional? If there are no questions, is there a motion to approve the lease agreement?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion passes, and the contract is approved. Next on the agenda is the approval of an agreement with Pitney Bowes for a Send Pro 3000 mailing system. And Laurel,
Yes, good morning.
good morning.
Yes, it is a lease for 48 months. We currently have had a contract that has since expired, and we're looking to replace what we currently have in-house with something of a better method as far as upgrades with efficiency as well as speed, and some of our usage of the original equipment has changed due to the vote by mail increased popularity. So with this new equipment, this would allow us to meet those needs as well as going forward with any future needs, should there be an increase in the mailing usage as
So
well.
what does this new equipment do?
The new equipment, actually, I have a representative, Val Miller,
Hi.
from Pitney Bowes here, and she can kind of give you a quick snapshot of what the new equipment does as opposed to what we currently have in house.
Great. One of the things that we're looking.
Why don't you step on up?
Oh, I haven't done this before.
All right.
That's okay.
You're friendly.
One of the objectives was for the mailroom staff to be able to go ahead and download addresses so that they could automatically be processed through the mailing system. Right now, it's a very laborious task where they're peeling and sticking them on. This is also going to allow the Chicago Board of Elections to qualify for postal discounts with the United States Postal Service, where you're going to be able to receive the discounted rate by processing in this method. We have, in that situation, the Chicago Board of Elections is going to save at least $938 over the course of 3 election periods. We also have an offering for pre-sort services where Pitney Bowes, it's not even a contract, it's just something that we include with our for our clients, and we're looking at an annual postal savings of about $6,400. And then the last one is the increased speed and the efficiency of the machine. It's 15% faster than the current device.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Okay.
Okay, and then also to the pricing that is a factor, we are going to be using a consortium through Minnesota as opposed to using an existing city contract. There was better cost savings for us with the Minnesota consortium contract.
Right, and I noticed that it was a cost-saving, annual
Yes, it was
cost of about
substantial.
$7,000.
Yes.
So, and throughout the term of the lease, it's about a $38,000 savings to the
Yes.
Board of Elections.
Mhm.
Oh, good, thank you. Are there any further questions? If there are none, is there a motion to approve a 48-month lease agreement with Pitney Bowes for $70,224 during the contract term, which is November 14, 2017 through December 2021. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next item on the agenda is an approval of a contract for temporary staffing services. And actually, we have two contracts. One is with APRO Execs, and the second is with Mack and Associates. And Laurel, we have used both of these
Yes, we have.
companies before.
Yes, in the last two elections we had, yes.
And are either of these minority?
Yes, they are. They actually, APRO is a minority as well as a business enterprise, and Mack and Associates is also a woman business. They are not a minority.
And, and so can you just speak a little
Sure.
bit as to these two?
Briefly, we did an evaluation process. Through an evaluation process, we've selected the administrative temporary staffing vendors, and they will be performing the services that we require for the election day, pre-election, the post-election, and we negotiated some of the questions and situations that we had with them. That's all been settled, and they have performed in the past, and that was one of the reasons why they also are qualified to perform the services. And the reason why we're asking for two, as we learned in the past, sometimes we are in a position where we need more than just one vendor to provide us with the number of temp staffing on a particular project or assignment or during the election time. So that was the reason for the two. Okay?
Are there any questions?
Yeah, I have a few. Laurel,
Yes.
in reading through the information, it's our contract states that the employees, or temp employees for these companies are paid at a rate of $13.15 an hour
That is the city's minimum wage. So they are
for contractors.
for contractors. All city contractors are required to pay $13.65 to their employees.
Okay, so can you just, for the record, articulate what happens year over year? I mean, I know, for example, come July 1st, there'll be an increase in the city's minimum wage from $11 to $12, and obviously subsequent to that. But what impact does that have on the rates that they're being paid, and how do escalations happen from year to year?
Sure. The current contract is required that all of our contractors maintain their awarded contract. It's a fixed price, okay? Now, MAC has stated that they would like an increase after the year of 2018. At that point, we have the option of either renewing the existing contract or extending that contract. As in the past, we've negotiated quite frequently with MAC and APRO with coming down in pricing at that point. So there is the flexibility of negotiating lesser prices should there be a need for their pricing. It doesn't meet our.
Okay, but what specifically in terms of the employees though? How are their wages increased from year to year?
That I don't have that information, because that would be something, it's a business decision and
But
they're.
I thought there was something in the contract that Mr. Lasker, maybe you can speak to. There's something in there about consumer price index, something or other. I'm just trying to get clarity around that.
In July of every year, the consumer price index can drive up the minimum wage in Chicago. And when that happens, it's my understanding the contract works to increase anyone's payment who might not, who might be at the minimum wage level under the contract.
The minimum
That
wage
being
of
said-
$13.15.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's generally 2 to 3% increase on July 1st on all contractors.
And this contract here goes to November 30. Is that right? Yeah.
2018.
2018. And for the 2019 cycle, are we going to be rebidding, or generally do we look to extend this contract for 2019?
In the past, we've extended it,
Okay.
but we'll view how the performance is and make our determination at that point.
Okay. So just for the record, I probably would like to have some kind of conversation about employee what am I trying to say here? As we get closer to whether we extend or rebid. I mean, for example, as an employer who's subject to the city's minimum wage, when wages go up for all my employees. And so when you go from 13, 15, consumer price index increase of 2 to 3% versus the dollar increase, there's maybe some questions in my mind in terms of what's fair to the folks. Because these folks here are temporary, but they're working on our behalf. And so I think it's important to make sure that they're, properly motivated. I know if I didn't increase my wages for my staff, they become demotivated, and that's not good for me.
I totally understand.
The demotivated employees are not good, especially when we're dealing with things like this. So I would like to have a conversation about that.
Absolutely.
Second question, you talked about them being minority-owned business and a woman-owned business. Can you speak specifically to historically what their workforce is, the diversity of their workforce is?
Yes. For APRO specifically, they have provided 94% of Black American staffing and 6% Hispanics.
Okay.
And as far as Mack and Associates, I don't have their ratios. I did reach out to them and ask them for it. I'm waiting on a response on that. So I can give you that information at a later date. But I know that in the past, from what I've actually seen with the temp staffing, there's been a variety of different ethnicities that they provide us.
Sure, I'm very sensitive to some of the conversation we had when we did our budget hearing a couple weeks ago at the City Council, and that the folks in the Latino caucus were concerned about what the numbers look like. And so to say that it looks good or whatever it is, I don't think that satisfies our City Council. So if we can get those specific numbers of what's been historically,
yes,
and just understand that especially for contracts like this, that's going to be a conversation that I'm going to be engaging in, because looking at that diversity and making sure that it's equitable across the board is really important. So to make sure that we adhere to what our fellow City Council is saying. So
very good. I will
just
have numbers for you, and if you'd like, we can meet over.
Okay, great, thank you.
And at the same time, it would be a good idea if you would remind APRO and MAC of our commitment to diversity and both in the African American community, the Latino community, and other minorities. We're not going to leave anyone out, but they should attempt to recruit from other sectors to reach a more balanced employee complement and staffing complement for the Board of Elections.
Very well. I will address that.
Madam Chairwoman, if I may, I was present for the interviews with these vendors, and I just want you to know that those issues were discussed with them. So
Right.
we will continue that conversation by all means, but it also has already started. It's been
Right.
ongoing.
And obviously you have the support of this board in pursuing those conversations.
Great.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further questions regarding the contracts for temporary staffing services? If not, is there a motion to approve an agreement between APRO Execs LLC and the Chicago Board of Elections for an amount not to exceed $700,000 for a one-year term starting December 1st, 2017 through November 30th, 2018.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Is there a motion to approve an agreement between the Chicago Board of Elections and Mack and Associates Limited in an amount of and not to exceed $300,000 for a term of 1 year starting December 1st, 2017 through November 30th, 2018?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion approved and the contracts are approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next on the agenda is legal report.
Well, petition filing begins November 27th for the March 20th primary. Petition filing ends on December 4th, then starts the objection filing period. The deadline for objections is December 11th. So we are all getting geared up for that. We are expecting our first electoral board hearing to convene on Monday, December 18th for the initial entry of the rules and get things started. And so I'll be sending you a schedule of some additional dates over the holidays. I'd like the three of you and myself to try to find dates that we can nail down that you'll be able to be here for electoral board meetings, for subpoena requests and so forth, while the cases are moving.
And the subpoena requests will come in immediately, so we need to address those because that's what's going to move the rest of the hearings.
That's correct, yep.
Okay.
So we'll get that scheduled. Also, we have been in talks, as you know, with the city clerk's office regarding the municipal ID that the city is initiating and how it can be used for voter registration and for voting. I'm going to be meeting, I was supposed to meet this week, but with the general counsel for the city clerk's office, they had to reschedule, but we will be meeting to issue a joint memorandum on those issues. And so what we've been consistently saying all along is that the election code is pretty broad in regards to what we are required to use, what we are required to accept from people when they register to vote. But we want to make sure that the city's messaging on this ID card, which they're intending to be for everybody, but also to really help people who have harder access to IDs. We want to make sure everybody understands that only citizens are allowed to vote, so that any non-citizens who end up obtaining this ID card, and they will be allowed to, are not put under the misunderstanding that they're allowed to vote.
I just want to be clear from what I just heard. So are you saying that it's your recommendation, as part of your analysis, that the municipal ID should be used as voter registration tool?
That is not my recommendation,
Okay.
but under
I
my
just wanna be
reading,
clear.
of the election code, it seems the election code would require us to accept it
Require us to accept it.
as a government-issued ID.
Yeah,
Okay.
if-
Yeah.
If so long as the person is a citizen of the United States.
Correct.
And that person has a municipal ID, I would think that that person can use that as a form, one of the forms of identification to register.
That would be correct, but we've seen some mock-ups for marketing, and we've heard their sort of initial marketing ideas where one of the issues would have been, hey, here's your municipal ID card, you can use it to vote, and they hand it to the person without knowing. See, they're not going to be checking, the current plan is they will not be checking or confirming citizenship status when they issue the ID.
Yeah, but they don't do
So-
that when they issue a state ID or Illinois driver's license either.
Correct?
Okay, but I think what the issue here is education and
Yes.
informing the city clerk, knowing what to say when those IDs are issued, and stating that if, to the person, if you're not a U.S. citizen, you cannot, you're not allowed to vote, to register to vote, and to use this in any way in an attempt to do so.
Correct, agreed, yep.
But I also think that if a person is a citizen, just having those instructions clearly stated is going to make a difference.
That's what we believe as well,
Mhm.
and that's what we've been pushing for.
So, and I don't disagree about the messaging. What I'm trying to get back to, though, is, because from listening to the conversation of the city council, there seemed to be a big question about whether the ID can be used. Are you stating that the election code, if the city decides to issue a municipal ID with whatever standards they use to issue a municipal ID, are you saying that the election code requires us to accept that? That's what I want to get at.
At least in most circumstances, yes. Because the language in the election code about the kinds of ID that can be used is rather broad.
Okay.
Utility bills, government-issued IDs.
Okay. So the question, I guess what I'm trying to get at is that the question about whether or not the municipal ID could be used is really a moot question because the code trumps that. Is that correct? From your reading?
The code trumps.
The code, so
State law.
the state law trumps the idea. Let me back up. The conversation that was had at the city council, from what I heard from the days that we were there, and the questions that were posed to us or to them, because they were sitting up there. We had a good seat on the side. Okay. The question that was posed was, can municipal IDs be used for registering people to vote? And so the question that was posed to us is, have a conversation with the city clerk to figure out whether it could or could not be used. What I'm hearing you say now is, which is different than I've heard before, is that the election code mandates us to accept government-issued ID. And so if it's issued by the city of Chicago, then therefore it needs to be accepted.
Correct.
Okay.
And so whatever confusion the city clerk's office has had about those issues is why they're asking us to get involved and asking me to meet with the city clerk's general counsel to help them put out a memorandum to the city council and to the public explaining these things.
Have we communicated that point that we just raised back to the city council?
Not yet.
No,
Not
that's
yet.
what the memorandum is for.
Yes. Because we are just now meeting with the city clerks. That's something we talked about. After we meet
Okay,
with them,
that's
then
fine.
we will
That-
get back with the
So
city council.
that's fine. It strikes me though that if the code says so, then, I mean, memorandum about how implementation is great, but if the code says we have to accept it, then we have to accept it.
Well, there's talk about how other jurisdictions that are starting municipal ID programs are not allowing them for voting. So I don't know where the confusion is coming from in City Hall, but they've asked us
It's
for
gonna be
clarification.
Presumably, it's going to be driven by that particular state's election code, correct?
I would assume. You know, there is a question as to whether Chicago could enact its own ordinance saying that this particular government ID, its own, could not be used for voting. But
That's not
we
a
don't
question.
think they're going to do
Yeah,
that.
but that's not a question for
So
us. I'm just
our
saying,
state law makes it.
From this board's point of view, I just want to be clear that this board point of view said, its interpretation is that the election code says that any government-issued ID has to be accepted for the purposes of voter registration and or whatever process in the voting process.
Correct, because, for example, the election code does not say that you may use a state-issued identification card.
Okay.
So it's not it doesn't have to be the state of Illinois. It doesn't have to be Jesse White's office that issues it. It says a government ID.
Okay.
You know,
I just
yeah.
want to be clear about that point. And so,
Further specifies school IDs, passports issued by the federal government, school IDs issued by school districts.
okay.
Just to clarify, it's my understanding under the Federal Real ID Act, though, the state of Illinois, Secretary of State is checking citizenship, and that part of the automatic voter registration, they are checking that as well, and I see our communications director making hand signals.
Currently, the Secretary of State's office is in the process of completing
Right.
the implementation of the Real ID system. And that is why automatic voter registration is going to be on hold for a while, because they don't want to inadvertently automatically register a non-citizen. So when the Secretary of State system gets to the point where it separates driver's license and state IDs that have a basis such as a birth certificate from the United States and or naturalization papers from for U.S. citizens, then we'll be able to move forward with automatic voter registration. I just want to remind the board in the context of this discussion on government IDs that we've always had this where there is no citizenship proof required to get a Chicago public school ID. You have to affirm, though, on the form that you're a U.S. citizen. The distinction here is that CPS has never said, hey, you can use your employee or student ID to register to vote. They've never used it as a marketing device. And with the clerk's office, we had to caution, please don't use this saying you can take this and register to vote, because the two are not intertwined. Secondly, this ID, as I understand it, the city ID, will not have an address. So there's also one more form of identification that would be required to show an address. So you can use a bank statement, a pay stub, right now, utility bill, etc., government correspondence, and then you're affirming that you are a U.S. citizen. That's the way it goes, whether you mail in your registration, whether you do it through a deputy voter registrar, whether you do it across the counter with one of our staff members.
I think we just want to make sure we don't have another situation like that unfortunate case out of the Seventh Circuit of a woman who, for whatever reason, mistakenly thought she could vote and did, and didn't report it. So we don't want to rip families apart. So we want to make sure that there is not a signal or a message sent that if you're not a citizen, this would allow you to vote. So as long as that's clear, I have no problem.
That will be
And
clear.
that was based on Secretary of State ID,
Right.
not
Not,
any type
yeah.
of municipal or other
Right,
ID.
she went to the Secretary of State's to get her driver's license, and she was then registered to vote and voted, and sadly, I think she's back in Peru now, so.
One last question. Are there any qualifiers in the code about government-issued ID? What qualifies as a government-issued ID?
No, not that I've seen.
Okay. So anything that's issued by a governmental body could qualify?
Good, yes, yes.
Even a Medicaid or Medicare card.
Yes.
Yep.
And as I recall, just please, correct me if I'm wrong, void cards can or cannot be used?
Can.
They can be used in this case, okay?
We have an entire list I can provide for you, but they include Medicare, insurance cards, driver's license, state IDs from other states, because you may have recently moved.
Sure.
Utility bills, bank statements, pay stubs, government correspondence. So
Okay.
government ID can range from you work at the University of Illinois to a Medicare card.
And Mr. Allen did make a good point that the municipal ID card will not have an address on it. The election code does somewhat categorize between forms of ID with your address and one without. So that is, the municipal ID would not be as strong for voter registration as your driver's license, which has your address and photo on it. But it would be one of the permissible forms. Yeah.
Well, it sounds like then it's not for our purposes, it's not a policy question, it's driven by state law, so.
Correct.
It's up to the,
We just want them to market it correctly, really.
Sure,
That's what it
sure,
comes down to.
sure, I understand.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry, one last question. Is there any other conversation that you've been aware of in your conversation about the municipal ID and its relationship to ex-offenders and returning citizens?
Well, I've heard that they're trying to make it readily available to those kinds of people, but that's the extent of the conversation I've had about it, or I've heard about it.
I guess I'm wondering, in light of this conversation that Mr. Gough is having with respect to pretrial detainees and having with respect to publicizing because there are a lot of people out here in the community that don't realize that just because you had a felony, they think Florida law trumps, that just because you had a felony, which Florida weather trumped, that's another story, just got back. But anyway, that just because you had a felony does not kick you out of the voting experience. So maybe that's something. Maybe it's part of the conversation.
That's part of our conversation.
With respect to the clerk.
This is a real broad conversation
Good.
about pretrial detainees, and we're going to involve the State Board of Election because it's not only the city of Chicago and Cook County, but the whole state of Illinois. So
And honestly, from our perspective, I wouldn't. If we're having this conversation in that regard, maybe as a part of the clerk conversation that needs to be brought up.
The reason that could be a very good conversation is we've heard that one of the problems facing pretrial detainees is a lack of identification.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the city is talking about that this card is going to be issued like out of the back of trucks, like they're going to have little printers, and
Let's not say back with trucks.
I think they're literally talking like, food truck kind of vehicles. They're literally vans, I'll call them vans or something. Municipal vehicles that will travel around with the printer in it.
That's better.
And the ID card can be printed on the spot and handed out from the municipal vehicle to the person with the ID. So if it's that simple, and we've got this, the county wants us to work with pretrial detainees who need ID, maybe the city can show up with one of their printers.
That would be wonderful.
Well, and then we're also talking about at the jail, they all have their information before they're released. Why don't they give them a government-issued ID? So something that we're looking into.
Do we have any idea of what documents you have to show so that I can't just go to that truck and say I'm Jonathan Swain and get an ID?
Why would you do that?
I would say we should ask the city that.
We haven't finished. We're still talking to
We're
them.
still in conversation.
Yeah, and then it's
But
not
it
finalized yet.
sounded rather easy to get the ID by design, so I think that some sort of documentation is required, but I don't know what they've got as the minimum parameters right now.
So maybe after we have this conversation, you can report back to us.
Absolutely.
Kind of where we've ended up, so we can be well provide any kind of advice and counsel on that
Absolutely.
particular matter.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. We have no financial report, and so now let's proceed to public comment. We have Laura Chamberlain.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks very much for coming out against Crosscheck and being supportive of the push to move the states onto ERIC. We really appreciate that. And also thank you for your work in furthering diversity of the temporary staff. That was really a glaring issue that we haven't even brought up to you yet, but we've noticed it. Okay, my question is about the electronic voting machines and the new equipment. We're coming into the March elections, and we really haven't heard of a timetable. And we've been talking to some of the city council members about the possibility of a large expenditure, and they're not so cool on this. They're not so good on this. So can we ask you about where are the timing of the purchase of the electronic machines, or the leasing, or have you decided on what vehicle between buying and leasing, and when you might implement the machines?
Well, briefly, the answer to the question is that it depends. It depends on funding, it depends on the pricing that we get when we ultimately negotiate with two or one, ultimately the pick. And we know at this point, though, we're not going to be introducing new equipment for the March 20 primary. We're going to press in the coming month with our election judge handbooks, and we have to start training in early January. There's no time to sign a contract, negotiate a contract, sign a contract, and take delivery and implement this. So we're eager to do it, but it's not going to happen for the March 20 primary. And we've asked the vendors to propose a scheme where it works in, such as perhaps a limited number of precincts or early voting before we do a citywide rollout. So we don't want to try to, we've been through a transfer from the punch cards to the current system in 2005. It was a bumpy ride when we rolled out everywhere, and we were also introducing early voting at the very same time. So the short answer to the question is it depends.
Okay, so then we have a recommendation, and that is the November 2016 audit was so egregious to us, where over 2,200 ballot positions were never reconciled. They went from 5 days to 11 days and really basically never finished the audit, which is the citizens' only verification of the actual vote numbers. And we really, really push for the citizens to be able to see that their votes are being verified. So we would recommend that you strongly consider ballot on demand for early voting. All of the problems that we saw in the audits in March 2016 and November 2016 were on the early voting. The touchscreen cash register tapes are very, very hard to count. They're very, very hard to recount. They're very, it was very problematic. So instead of deploying the DREs in the early voting for everyone, they could be deployed for the disabled, okay? But instead of deploying it for everyone, you could simply consider ballot on demand in the early voting centers. Ballot on demand, we already have laptop computers that are in the election. All of the early voting stations, they have laptops. That's how they're running the electronic poll books, are laptops. In the early voting stations, they could be downloaded with all the ballot styles, and somebody could come in and give their ID, and their ballot style could be brought up and then printed. So that's all it is. A ballot on demand, is just a printer. It's just a ballot printer.
That entails new voting equipment.
No. Actually, I called the state. I called the state, Illinois State Board of Elections. This does not require certification at all. It literally is just you're buying a printer for
Well,
every
we're
single.
not-
No,
No,
that
it's
is-
not that simple, Ms. Chamberlain. It really isn't that simple.
Okay.
It's not a matter of going to Office Depot and buying a printer and setting it up.
I understand.
That's, I hope you do.
I understand
I
that.
think you do.
I do understand that, but I am telling you that it's probably simpler than you think. Like I
Well-
said, there's no certification. And also, it's better than going through one of those audits again, where the citizens were left completely high and dry with no verification of their votes.
Okay. And-
Absolutely an unlawful audit. It's
And-
better
No,
than going through
And,
that again.
and let me,
But-
let me just remind you that our
I'm not slandering
we
anything.
performed our audits, and in fact,
No, you did
a
not.
federal judge has dismissed your complaint regarding the 5% audit with
No, it
prejudice.
hasn't.
So-
No, it hasn't. No, it hasn't. And
Yes.
that was over the March 2016.
Oh.
And in November, we didn't file a lawsuit. But don't hold it to us in March of 2017,
I
okay?
encourage you.
So we highly, highly recommend that you consider ballot on demand. It's very, very simple to implement. There are many
just
companies.
stated it's
Can
not
I
that
just
simple.
tell you the rest of my statement, and then you can talk? And that is that it would cost literally only less than $200,000 to get a printer in every single early voting station. And that, you don't have to buy expensive machines
I
to have.
just want to be clear,
Yes.
because
Do I get
the-
my time or?
you are,
actually,
but
your
you're making,
time
you're
has
making
expired.
statements
No,
that
I'm
are.
gonna actually run my own timer, because I get
Okay,
5
go ahead.
minutes without everybody else.
Okay.
this-
Commissioners, I just want to remind that we use a 22-inch ballot. There is no printer.
Yes, there is.
There is
Yes,
no.
there is. ES&S has some. There are many printers, ballot printers. There's ballot on demand all over the place.
We can't
That
use
is a
ES&S
lie.
equipment with Dominion. I mean, we're heading into highly speculative, not even fact-based.
Ballot
law.
on demand is functioning in many, many, many jurisdictions around the country.
I'm sure it is.
Okay, I can get you a
But
list of that if you would
it's not
like.
functioning
We
here.
already have.
I understand,
unfortunately.
but you're headed towards a very, we're gonna be there in the audit. And
I hope so.
We're gonna
We
want
need
the
you.
protocols that BKD outlined for you as appropriate audit behavior, and we're gonna be watching. And if you run out into the point where you just throw up your hands and say, sorry, we can't count the votes, you're probably headed for more legal action, because that is not adequate for the citizens of Chicago. That is not verification of our votes.
And we have always been able to count our votes. and
In
I'm
November
confident-
of 2016, let the record show that they had to report to the state of Illinois over 2,200 ballot positions that were not reconciled. Thank you. You cannot, facts are facts. Thank you.
And we will proceed. Mr. Daniel Sheehan? Good morning, Mr. Sheehan.
Morning. Yeah, to piggyback off Dr. Laura, so if you can't get the ballot on demand, can we just go to paper? Because these Sequoia machines are, what, 17 years old? They're notably hacked across the country.
Where are they notably hacked? I mean, I'm.
DEFCON?
Mr. Sheehan, I just want you to, because when you say those broad statements,
DEFCON.
I just want to understand what you're saying, because they haven't been hacked here. We're not, connected in any way to the internet. Everything's done internally. And so I don't understand. I just want clarification.
Okay, computer code can happen. The cellular wireless that you transmit at the end of that can be hacked. Anyhow, across the country, these jurisdictions are either going to paper or new machines. Do you know any other jurisdiction that still uses Sequoia?
It's Dominion, and yes, the questions that have been coming up recently are systems that don't have a paper trail. And secondly, the transmission is a preliminary transmission from the precinct. We don't even get 90% of our results transmitted from the precinct. The one that's backed up is on a T1 line from our receiving stations, and that's the one that's 100% secure. there's no hacking of a T1 line. So I think some of these statements are kind of inflammatory, to say the least. So if you know of a hacking of a receiving station T1 line where we get 100% of our transmissions, or I should say 99.9, there are some that can't transmit, please let us know. Wait, this is an attack.
From Dominion, when you download into their computers before the election, it can be.
Okay, so if they download into the computer before election with software,
What?
When you download, when
Ms.
Dominion.
Chamberlain, okay, you've had your opportunity. I'd like to hear from Mr. Sheehan.
okay.
That's false statement, I'll just say that.
Okay, anyhow, not too many jurisdictions still use the Dominion. They've all moved on.
That's not true.
That's not true at all.
They're
No?
selling,
Yeah.
there are new systems going into place. I'm not defending any any.
No, I don't mean to, I mean.
But
Sequoia.
Hart,
Sequoia's out of
Dominion,
business.
and we work with Dominion
Right.
But it was
software.
the
Hart.
same machine. It was the same machine.
The software that we're discussing is Dominion.
Okay.
And ES&S are selling new systems in new jurisdictions across the country.
So that software can't be,
Any software, technically.
Thank
okay,
you.
that's
But,
all.
but the safeguard, the key is putting in safeguards, and we put in safeguards. The T1 line is not vulnerable to hack.
What's the T1, is that the cellular line?
No,
No,
no, that's a system for
The secure
transmission.
direct line.
It's a secure direct line from the receiving station.
Okay, how about
We have
this?
25 receiving stations across the city.
okay. How about the cellular transmission?
Cellular
It's
transmission has
cellular
a,
transmission, but that's just a preliminary number and not an official number. The T1 line, the secure transmission, which comes later in the evening when the data is brought to the receiving stations, that's a secured line, and that's the one that we really rely on. The
Okay.
preliminary numbers that get transmitted by cell line is just preliminary.
Well, how do you feel about going to all paper down the road? All paper ballots?
we are at all paper.
Would we have
It's a
voted?
matter of a paper system that might work better for our audit system. We're well aware of that, that's in our specifications. But Illinois requires every single ballot to be cast, and it has been cast, on a paper ballot. The voter verifiable paper audit trail.
Well, I'm a paper ballot, not the toilet paper roll thing, but an actual paper ballot.
You know, you can take a 10-year-old roll, you can dunk it in water, and it's still legible. So I think the term toilet paper roll is just,
Well,
it's
it's just-
inflammatory.
I don't mean to be
You know, I can
inflammatory.
show
What
it
would
to
you
you,
like me
you
to
know.
call it?
Well, it's not a toilet paper
Well,
roll.
kind of a
I mean,
roll.
come on, you can write on a
Just call it the
toilet,
roll.
you know.
All right, when they're auditing that, and it's unwinding at the tables, and they're trying to count it, and that's another thing I want to go into, the contract with APRO and MAC. Now, we're talking about minimum wage. What's the administrative fees for these contracts? They're paying minimum wage. What's the owners of these companies making? Does anyone know? This is where you get, and are they the companies that hire the auditors at Pershing Road for the audit? They are. So a lot of these workers at Pershing Road, they're just there, they're not really into it because they're making minimum wage. I mean,
Well, technically, they're making more than minimum wage. I mean,
Okay.
they're making, just to be clear, they're making city standard minimum wage for city contracts, which is $13.15. Currently, minimum wage in Chicago is $11. So they're making more than what
Okay.
technical minimum wage
They're
is.
still not in.
Okay,
I just want to clarify the
that's
fact.
positive. No,
Yeah, to clarify, and there is and the way the contracts are drafted, there is effectively a fee they charge per employee, and then there's a guarantee as to what they pay, and in that difference is where the companies are going to make their profit and cover whatever it is. That's why we do put guarantees to make sure that the employees are being compensated appropriately, and that's why I raised my questions about their
Right.
compensation, because you are correct. Those folks are representing us, and it's appropriate that they are motivated appropriately to make sure that that they're doing the best job they can do on behalf of the citizens.
I understand, and I agree with you. However,
Mhm.
if they can be paid more, if the administrators are making a ton of cash, maybe they can pay even more than the 11, 13 or whatever. You know what I'm saying? We don't know how much the owners of these companies are making.
what we do know is there is a difference between what they charge per hour to us and then the guarantee of what they pay their employees. They could be paying some employees $16 an hour. We don't know. So my point is that yes, there's this duality we have to look at in terms of the cost of the overall providing administrative staff, or temporary staff, excuse me. And then the other side of that is making sure that the employees are compensated appropriately. And so that's what we have to balance with respect to that. I mean, we could, in theory, you could pay the folks, $50 an hour, but that means the cost of that contract will have to go up because effectively a business has to make money to stay in business.
I understand
Right.
they make money, we just don't know how much they make.
You do understand this was put out through a very public RFP process, and that several vendors came and we've selected the least expensive. I mean,
No,
there's only so many options we have here, right?
I know, but it just seems like my experiences with elections, the polling places, the judges don't make much, the investigators, some of them aren't really engaged. It seems like the employees down at the audit aren't really engaged. It's like maybe with a little bit higher pay, there'd be more engagement.
Where do you want us to get that money from?
Well, yeah,
Why don't you go talk to Springfield about these problems? They can fix it.
But you have money for, like these bracelets you had in the last election, when people voted $1 million for the contract for a bracelet.
That was not $1 million.
$1 million?
I thought it was $1 million.
No.
How much was it?
Okay,
I
my
have
mistake.
to look, but
I
it
thought it
was,
was $1 million.
Very good.
no, I mean,
No, I'm
we
sorry.
have an
That's a lot of
ample supply
bracelets.
going
Yeah.
forward for
Okay.
the future election, but it
Okay.
wasn't
I mean, that's
thousands of
a dollar
dollars.
bracelet.
Just
Yeah, I thought it was like
stickers
$10,000
or anything like that,
Anyway.
yeah, I mean,
Well, I'm
No.
just saying, there's money out there.
Your point is well. I think your point is well taken.
Okay.
With respect to the fact that dollars motivate folks in ways that no dollars don't. And so the question becomes, how do we make sure that we have the appropriate people in staff in these appropriate positions to do their job? And so that's why we increased our judges' pay last go round, and we're always looking to find ways to make sure we have the best quality people at the best price, and still have to have the duty to make sure that we're balancing that with the expectation that we have a budget we have to adhere to. So your point is well taken.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm finished.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Rubenstein?
Yes, thank you. I'll be very brief. I just wanted to say that in recent elections, Georgia special elections, you get the machines, and there were a lot of problems there, and some results were erased later that they were trying to investigate.
Okay,
And-
I have to just stop you there again because that's another broad statement.
Okay.
I don't, can you be more specific?
Okay, well, I
Georgia
just want to
six.
say, I just want to contrast. Virginia just had some very good election results and clean, and they used paper ballots, and that's all I want to say.
Yeah, just
I
on the Georgia 6, if I can, that's one of those jurisdictions, Pennsylvania, a couple where they do not have paper backup on the voting, and unfortunately, there were a couple of instances where the memories apparently got erased before they could, vouch the results. So,
Yes.
fortunately, we currently have paper backup on every vote cast in the city of Chicago. We're moving towards some new system. We're still in the process. I'm sure our people would be just as happy as you to have a full-size sheet of paper. I see we're both wearing glasses.
Yes.
That make it a lot easier to read.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
but we can't just implement something quickly because, as we all are aware, the security problem that would be necessary to implement a new system. So we are moving towards it, see how we go, we look at the options, and then, as Commissioner Swain points out, we have to always consider the taxpayer as well. But we're getting, as we all are,
Yes, we
yes.
all are.
And as we move forward, we hear your concerns, and we
It'll be
will
cheaper
certainly-
to
Yes.
have paper on, ballot on demand.
We'll-
And in the early voting, and the security
Ma'am,
is
you've
not
had your
attached to
time,
the
right, in
internet.
fairness to everyone else, okay. But I thank you for coming forward.
You're just
Okay.
bringing up
You're
those
welcome.
you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Ms. Tobin.
spurious arguments.
Good morning, hi. So I would like to reiterate too, that at least consider that this is a possibility
and investigate it. That's all we're asking, just to do your best efforts to come up with a system like ballot on demand where there is more transparency and there is a better paper record.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're always looking for the
Thank you.
best possibility.
I appreciate that.
Okay, and now that concludes public comments. Do we have a need for executive session?
No?
No. If not, then we will adjourn to December 5th at 9 a.m. for a regular board meeting. We will not have a board meeting on November 28th.
Or 26th?
28th,
yeah.
2017.
Okay.
Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you.